He heard her voice before he even opened the door. That was the thing no one tells you about a house that size. Sound travels differently in a place built to impress rather than to hold people. The ceilings are too high, the hallways too long, and a voice carrying through those corridors doesn't soften the way it does in a normal home. It arrives sharp, intact. Every syllable delivered exactly as intended. Marcus Whitfield stood in the entryway of his family's estate in West Vancouver, one hand still on the brass door handle, his coat not yet off his shoulders. He had come home 4 hours early because a dinner meeting had fallen through, and because somewhere in the back of his mind, in the place he rarely allowed himself to examine, he had wanted to check on Lydia. What he heard instead was his mother's voice. "You are going to sit there and you are going to listen to me, because no one else in this house is going to say it to your face." He didn't move. "You think because Marcus married you, that makes you one of us. It doesn't. It will never make you one of us. You came from nothing, and nothing is what you'll have if you make the mistake of forgetting who actually built this family." A pause. Then quieter and somehow worse for it. "That child you're carrying doesn't change that. If anything, it gives me more reason to make sure you understand your place before it arrives." Marcus set his briefcase down on the marble floor without meaning to. The sound of it, the soft thud, wasn't enough. He heard his mother's footsteps shift in the next room. He should have gone in immediately. He knew that. Every reasonable part of him understood that the correct thing, the only thing, was to push open that door and say something. But he stood there for 3 full seconds and did not move, and those 3 seconds would cost him more than he understood yet. Lydia Whitfield, née Lydia Cote, from a small town outside Moncton that most people in Marcus's world had never heard of, had been married to him for 2 years and 3 months. She was 31 years old, 26 weeks pregnant with their first child, and she had not told Marcus a single word about what his mother had been doing to her since the day they moved into the estate. That was the part Marcus would struggle with longest afterward. Not what his mother had done, not even his own failure to see it, but that Lydia had carried it alone, in silence, in that house, every single day, and had never once allowed him to see the weight of it on her face. She had made a choice, early on, that she would not be the reason Marcus had to choose between his wife and his mother. She had watched other women make that demand and watched what it cost them, so she absorbed what came at her. The remarks about her accent, the instructions delivered in the tone of someone correcting a servant, the cold way Constance Whitfield would speak around her at dinner as though she were furniture. And she kept it inside the locked room of herself, where she kept most things that hurt. When Marcus finally pushed open the door to the sitting room that evening, he found Lydia in the armchair nearest the window, her hands folded in her lap with a deliberateness that looked almost peaceful. His mother was standing near the fireplace with a glass of water, the posture of someone who has been interrupted mid-sentence and is merely waiting for the interruption to pass. "You're home early," Constance said. "Sit down, Mum." Something in his voice, flat, without the usual effort toward diplomacy, made her pause. She looked at him the way she had looked at him since he was a boy, assessing, recalibrating, deciding how to handle him. "I was just having a conversation with Lydia about." I heard the conversation. The room got very quiet. Lydia looked at him then, and it was the first real look she had given him in weeks. Unguarded, uncertain, a question in it that she didn't know how to ask. He had heard. He had finally actually heard. "Marcus, I was simply trying to." I said, "Sit down." Constance Whitfield had not built the family. That was the first thing Marcus needed to understand, and it took him longer than it should have. The Whitfield estate, the hotel group, the properties scattered across British Columbia from the Okanagan to the coast, those had been built by his father Gerald Whitfield, and by a business partner who had been with him from the beginning. A woman named Annette Cote, Lydia's mother. Marcus had known, in the abstract way that children know things about their parents' professional lives, that his father had a business partner in the early years. He had a dim memory of a woman with red hair and a quick laugh who had come to the house once or twice when he was very young. He remembered liking her. He didn't remember her name. When he was old enough to ask about the early years of the company, his father had died, and his mother had told the story of a self-made man who had built everything through vision and hard work and the grace of God. The name Annette Cote did not appear in that story. It also did not appear in any of the company documentation his mother had managed since Gerald's death, 11 years ago. The original partnership agreement, the one that gave Annette Cote a 30% stake in what was then a small boutique hotel in Whistler, had been filed in 1987 and, according to Constance's accountants, had been dissolved by mutual consent in 1991, except that Annette Cote had never signed a dissolution agreement. Marcus didn't know any of this the night he came home early. He didn't know it the week after, when he and Lydia had the long, difficult, necessary conversation that neither of them had allowed themselves to have before. He learned it slowly, in pieces, the way you learn most things that have been deliberately kept from you. What he learned first, that evening in the sitting room, was simpler and more devastating. His wife had been suffering in his house, under his roof, with his knowledge at the edges and his attention deliberately elsewhere, and he had let it happen. Lydia didn't tell him everything at once. That wasn't her way. She had spent a long time learning to hold herself carefully. And even when Marcus sat across from her that night after his mother had left the room, had left with the contained fury of someone who intends to revisit a matter at a more advantageous time. Even then, Lydia didn't pour it all out. She told him about the morning 4 months ago, when Constance had informed the household staff that Lydia's dietary instructions for her pregnancy were preferences, not requirements, and that meals should continue to be planned as they always had been. She told him about the afternoon a visiting relative had asked about the baby, and Constance had answered every question as though Lydia were not sitting 2 feet away. She told him about the comments, so many comments, delivered with the pleasant face of someone offering useful guidance. About Lydia's background, her family, her education, the way she held her fork. Marcus listened. He did not interrupt. He had the good sense for once in his adult life, to simply sit and let it reach him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked when she had gone quiet. Lydia looked at the fire. "Because I knew how much it would cost you, and I didn't want to be the one asking you to pay it." He didn't say anything for a moment. "That wasn't your decision to—" "No," she said. "I suppose it wasn't." They sat with that for a while. "She said something tonight," Lydia said eventually. "About my mother, about where I came from." She paused. "She said that whatever I thought I was entitled to in this house, I should remember that nothing my family ever touched actually belonged to them." Marcus frowned. "What does that mean?" Lydia shook her head slowly. "I've been wondering that since she said it." It was Daniel Ozzie, Marcus's oldest friend who had worked as the company's legal counsel for 6 years, who found it first. Marcus had asked him, carefully and without explaining everything, to pull the original incorporation documents from the Whitfield Group's founding period. He'd said he was doing an internal review. Daniel had accepted that with the mild skepticism of someone who has known a person long enough to recognize when they're not telling the full story, and had gone looking. He called Marcus on a Tuesday morning. "You need to come in," he said. Not a phone conversation. When Marcus arrived at Daniel's office downtown, there was a folder on the thing. He opened it and turned it so Marcus could read Partnership Agreement, Whitfield Cote Hospitality Ventures. Dated March 14, 1987. 2 signatories. Gerald Arthur Whitfield and Annette Marie Cote. 30% equity stake Cote. 60% Whitfield. 10% held in trust for future investors. Marcus stared at the page for a long moment. "Keep going," Daniel said. He turned to the next document. A letter, dated 1993. Annette Cote to Gerald Whitfield, formally requesting her quarterly distributions, which had not been received for 2 quarters. The tone was calm, professional and confused. She seemed to believe it was an administrative error. The next document was a letter from Gerald's lawyer, also dated 1993, informing Annette Cote that her stake had been transferred by her own authorization in a dissolution agreement signed the prior year. The next document was a copy of that dissolution agreement. The signature at the bottom was not Annette Cote's. Marcus looked up. "Someone forged it," Daniel said simply. "The signature doesn't match anything else from her. I've had 2 people look at it independently. The letterhead is the right period, but the ink distribution is wrong, the letter formation is wrong, and the notarization references a commission number that doesn't correspond to any registered notary in BC at that time." Marcus sat back in the chair. "My father?" he asked. Daniel looked at him steadily. "Your father died with clean hands as far as I can tell. The transfer was initiated after his first heart attack, when he was in the hospital and your mother had signing authority." The room was very still. "Annette Cote died in 2019, Daniel said. "I checked. She was living in New Brunswick at the time. She never pursued legal action. Either she didn't know the signature was forged, or she couldn't afford to fight it, or both." Marcus thought about a woman with red hair and a quick laugh who had come to the house when he was very young. He thought about Lydia, 26 weeks pregnant, sitting in an armchair with her hands folded in her lap with a deliberateness that looked like peace but was actually survival. "Her daughter," Marcus said quietly. "Lydia's mother." "Yes," Daniel said. He did not go home that evening. He sat in Daniel's office for 2 hours, going through everything, reading every document twice. He called no one. He sent Lydia a message that said, only, "I'm going to be late. I'll explain everything tonight. Are you all right?" She replied, "I'm fine. Take your time." He thought about what it had cost her to learn to say that. To make herself small enough, patient enough, quiet enough to say "I'm fine" in a house where she had been systematically diminished for 2 years. Carrying a child, waiting for someone to notice. He had noticed too late. He was going to have to live with that. But living with it was different from letting it continue. He told Lydia that night. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room, not anywhere his mother might appear, and he told her everything. The partnership, the forged dissolution, Annette Cote's distributions that had stopped in 1993 and never resumed, the signature that wasn't her mother's. Lydia listened the way she listened to everything. Completely still, eyes steady, the only sign of what was happening inside her in the slight tightening of her hands on the table. When he finished, she didn't speak for a long moment. She knew, Lydia said finally, that's why she said it. About nothing belonging to my family. She wasn't trying to wound me, she was reminding herself. Marcus hadn't thought of it that way. She's been afraid of this, Lydia said slowly, this whole time. Every time she looked at me. She wasn't just seeing the girl who wasn't good enough. She was seeing the person who might one day find out what she did to my mother. She looked at him. Do you believe me? She asked. About all of it. Not just the documents, everything. Yes, he said. Without hesitation. I need to hear you say it like you mean it. I believe you. I'm sorry it took me this long to deserve to say that. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. It was the first time in weeks she had reached for him. He asked Constance to come to his office the following Friday. He had considered doing it at the estate, on her own ground, where she had the advantage of familiarity and 30 years of accumulated domestic authority. He had decided against it. He wanted neutral territory. He wanted documentation on his desk and Daniel in the room, and he wanted his mother seated across from him, not in the armchair by the window where she had stood and told his pregnant wife that she came from nothing. She arrived looking composed and slightly curious, which was how she looked when she sensed something was happening, but had not yet calculated the angle of it. She wore the dark green coat she always wore to the office, a coat that managed to communicate, wordlessly, that she was doing one a favor by appearing. Marcus waited until she was seated. Then he set the copy of the 1987 partnership agreement on the desk in front of her. She looked at it, her expression did not change immediately. That was what he remembered most afterward. Not the moment it changed, but the pause before it did, the fraction of a second where he could see her processing, calculating, deciding which version of this she could still manage. She reached for the document. Daniel, quietly, moved it back. We have originals, Daniel said. Constance looked at Marcus. Where did you find these? That's not the question, Marcus said. Marcus, the question is what you did to Annette Cote, and what you said to my wife in my house while she was pregnant, and what you've been saying to her for 2 years that I failed to stop. Constance straightened in her chair. Lydia has been, don't, he said. Whatever you're about to say about Lydia, don't. The word landed between them like a door closing. His mother looked at him for a long moment. He saw something move across her face. Not remorse, or not only remorse, but something more complicated than that. The beginning of understanding that this version of events, the one she had maintained for 30 years, had come to an end. It was a different time, she said. Your father was ill, I was protecting the company. Annette had already stepped away. She hadn't stepped away, she was removed. Without her knowledge. With a forged signature. The business would have. I'm not asking you to justify it. I'm telling you that it happened, and I'm telling you that Lydia's mother spent the rest of her life without what she was owed. And Lydia grew up without what her mother was owed, and you stood in my house and told my wife that nothing really belonged to them. He paused. She was right. Nothing her family touched was allowed to belong to them. Because you took it. Constance said nothing. Lydia and I are moving out of the estate, Marcus said. We'll be in our own home before the baby arrives. You will not contact Lydia directly. If there is something that needs to be communicated, you communicate it through me. The company situation is being reviewed by Daniel's firm, and there will be a settlement discussion. I would encourage you to approach it without a lawyer who tells you to fight, because that is not a fight you will survive. His mother sat very still. And the other thing, he said, the thing I should have said 2 years ago, the week after we were married. Lydia is my wife, she is the mother of my child, she is not a guest in this family, she is not a project, or a problem, or someone whose place needs to be established. She is my family. The first loyalty I have is to her. If you are unable to treat her as that, as family, as someone deserving of dignity and respect, then you and I will need to manage a much greater distance than a different house. Constance looked at him, her eyes were bright and he couldn't tell whether it was anger or the beginning of something else. He found that he didn't need to know. The meeting is finished, he said. Daniel will be in touch about next steps. He drove home that evening through the November rain, through the particular gray-blue dark of a Vancouver winter afternoon, where the mountains disappear into cloud and the whole city seems smaller and more honest without them. He thought about Lydia at home. She had asked him that morning, before he left, "How do you want me to be when you come back?" He had told her he didn't understand the question. I mean, she had said, "Do you want this to be a big moment? Or do you just want to come home?" He had thought about it. "I just want to come home," he said. She had nodded, and gone to make tea, and that was the whole of it. He parked in the driveway of the house they'd been renting. A house that was already theirs in every way that mattered, even before today, and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. He had failed her in significant and specific ways. He had been too comfortable in his own inattention, too willing to let the dynamic of that house continue because examining it would have required him to examine himself. He had known something was wrong, and had translated that knowing into the background noise of a busy life. That was not something he could undo. What he could do, what he intended to spend considerable time doing, was be the person she had decided to believe he might become. The one she had covered with her hand across the kitchen table. The one she had stayed for, even when she could have left. The light was on in the kitchen. He could see her through the window, moving slowly, one hand at the small of her back the way she always stood now. Her profile turned toward something, on the counter. She didn't know he was in the driveway. She was simply being herself in a space where she felt safe, and something about that, the ordinary privacy of it, the small uncomplicated fact of it, made his chest tighten with something that took him a moment to name. It was gratitude, and underneath it the dull persistent ache of understanding exactly how close he had come to losing it. He got out of the car. The legal resolution took 8 months. A settlement was reached in which a portion of the Whitfield Group's historical earnings, calculated against Annette Cote's original stake, compounded and adjusted, was transferred to a trust in Lydia's name as the sole heir of her mother's estate. It was not everything. Legal processes rarely deliver everything. But it was significant and it was real, and it was a form of acknowledgement that a document could provide, even if it could not provide everything else. Their daughter was born in January. They named her Rosalie. Constance Whitfield met her granddaughter for the first time in March, in a neutral location that Lydia had chosen. A cafe near the hospital, a Sunday afternoon, 2 hours, supervised in the loose sense that Marcus was there and the terms had been made clear. Constance arrived on time. She brought something small and wrapped in white tissue paper. She held Rosalie for a few minutes carefully, with an expression that Marcus had not seen on her face before. Lydia watched. Afterward, when they were home and Rosalie was asleep and the apartment was quiet with the kind of quiet that newborns impose on a household, Lydia sat down on the couch and was still for a long moment. Did that help? Marcus asked. She thought about it. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I think it might take time. That's fair. She didn't say anything wrong. She didn't say much of anything. She just held her. Lydia paused. I kept thinking about my mother. About whether she'd ever sat in a room with Constance and felt watched the same way I used to feel watched. Whether she ever sensed that something was being decided about her that she didn't have a say in. Marcus was quiet. I think she probably did, Lydia said. I think my mother was a very smart woman who understood exactly what was happening to her and didn't have the resources to fight it. And I think Constance knew that. I think that was part of the calculation. She looked at him. I'm not going to forgive her quickly. I want you to know that. I'm not built that way, and I don't think I should be. I know, he said. But I'm also not going to let her determine how Rosalie grows up. She can be a grandmother. On our terms. In our time. Marcus nodded. Lydia reached over and straightened the hem of the blanket across his lap. A gesture so small and domestic and unself-conscious that it struck him, the way small things had been striking him lately with an intensity he hadn't expected. I want you to know something, she said. He waited. I stayed because I believed you could be the person I needed you to be, not the one you'd been, the one you were capable of. She glanced at him sideways. I need you to keep being that person, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you something. Can you do that? Yes, he said. She nodded once, looked back at the baby monitor on the table. Good, she said. Then we'll be all right.